findings of the Select Subcommittee on COVID. A bipartisan Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic recently released its findings in a new 500-page report. Among their findings is that COVID did, in fact, likely originate from a leak at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that the Chinese government, agencies within the United States government, and some members of the international scientific community sought to cover up facts concerning the origins of the pandemic. The report also found that former National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease Director Anthony Fauci prompted a 2020 study that supported the natural origins theory to disprove the lab leak theory, along with finding that measures including masking and social distancing were ineffective. The report also focused on an NGO called EcoHealth that sub-awarded NIH grants to the Wuhan Institute of Virology that facilitated dangerous gain-of-function research. Senator Mike Lee said of the report just a few short years ago, arguing that COVID came from a Chinese lab and that lockdowns and authoritarian measures didn't work would get you censored and kicked from social media. This report will stand as a warning for future generations of what not to do. What are your thoughts on this report, and what do you think government institutions can do to regain public trust, or is it even possible?
Yeah, I don't think it's even possible. I mean, we talked about this before with like guys like Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and this new crew of young, very staunch conservatives who are worried about, reinstilling values back into a broken system. Even then, you're going to have these political activists who are subverting their leadership. I mean, it's just the way it works, right? So I think the deep state is super deep. They're
What do you mean
embedded.
by that? What to you, what is the deep state?
The deep state for me, I think started under Obama, where you had a bunch of open DEI policies that allowed a lot of people in who were in for the wrong reason. They weren't in because they wanted to serve, protect, selflessly serve their nation, duty, etc. Their value systems were different. They wanted to get in because they wanted to change the system. They wanted to turn things around. It's the same time period in the military where we were both active duty, where I remember having to designate equal opportunist people that were Green Berets, special operators that now had to be equal opportunist reps. And I had to send them to school and divert them from going to schools like sniper school because we're about to go down range and kill bad guys. And now I have to divert them to equal opportunist school for 2 weeks. And I'm like, what? Oh, there's a mandatory brief for some DEI inclusive policy that's come out that we have to brief the entire battalion, all the ODAs. And I'm like, oh, this is different.
Who do
And
you
so,
think runs the deep state? This is the question I always ask people. Is it like the Knights of the Round Table, where these deep state
no,
people come in with swords and they put them on their table and they twist their mustache and they're pulling the strings? Like, what at the top, who do you think is running and managing this deep state?
I don't think it's hierarchical. I think what the deep state is a culture. I think the deep state is an embed of a culture, and the deep state, depending on the time period. Like, I mean, if we go back to the post-Vietnam era in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, oh, you had a deep state, except we wouldn't look at it as leftist radicals. You might even look at it as right-wing radicals, white nationalists, people who are, infusing LSD into the population and doing things to experiment with the American people, assassinating presidents, like really whack job type things because they were so paranoid, and then brought us into the Cold War. So the deep state is the culture that's deeply embedded, that's not focused on policies that are benefiting Americans. And I think right now, all the people that grew up in that deep state are now in positions of power. I just interviewed Chris that you had on your podcast, on the Cleared Hot podcast. I had him on my show. And really what he's talking about, he didn't say it per se, is an institutional and cultural shift based on policy changes, where we're opening the doors, we're letting anybody in. And I think the military and the government especially have seen a lot of that. So now those people who are foot soldiers in the potential culture shift are now in charge. And so I think that's problematic. And that's one of the reasons you get something like this, where they say anybody who says anything against the narrative they need to be shut down. They need to be censored. They need to be canceled. And they're meeting with Meta. They're meeting with Twitter, pre Elon Musk. And so you see all these things happen. I'm not surprised. I mean, the fact that you couldn't reasonably articulate that, is it more likely that the virus came from a lab that's in the same town or a wet market that's in the same town, where the lab focuses on virology and a novel COVID vaccine versus a wet market, which is, by the way, the same standard wet market across the entire billions plus population of China. So it's like, is that right? I think one, this investigation should have been done a long time ago. I don't know why it's taken so long. It should be it's like IG. It should be in conjunction with the institution. And two, your second question, I don't think the American people will ever trust the government. And I think that's a good thing, because as long as we're having open forums of discussion, which is one of the benefits of social media, and we're talking about these issues, we are weighing this with our experiences and opinions. That's a good forum to have a form of public debate. I think that's healthy.
Yeah, I read this, this short paragraph that I read at the beginning, and it reminds me that I have to be cautious on anything that is consumer facing, whether that's from a brand or a product, or specifically in this case, the government, because they were so vehemently against the lab theory. And I think the reason why, if I was a betting man, I would put my money on the third sentence, or the third little bullet point in this, is that they didn't want to be exposed for a direct or financial sponsorship of the lab. The number of times that I heard that the United States did not sponsor or participate in gain of function research was countless. And technically, what they would say is this: well, we don't actually do that as the United States government. And they'll do the same thing. And I'll go back to, one of your old employers, the agency. How can the agency get around doing things that they're not allowed to? Well, they fucking hire a contractor, or they find a company that they can pay through whatever facility that they want to, or whatever line item they want to. And then it's not the agency doing anything, it's the contractor. So yeah, EcoHealth, they sub-awarded NIH grants, which for the listener, that means they got money from the NIH, and then EcoHealth, in place of the United States government and giving the United States government an air gap cutout, put the money into the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That is exactly what our government tried to tell everybody that they weren't doing. Finding out that the social distancing and the masking didn't work. Those were legitimate control mechanisms that I watched, and I'm sure you watch people. I still see people not socially distancing anymore, but masking. And maybe they have a compromised immune system. I'm not trying to judge that in any stretch. But I also watch people almost get into fistfights, screaming at somebody else that they weren't wearing a mask. Where did they get that passionate belief that they were at risk and that that person was risking the lives of others? Because of what they were told by our own government. I don't know what the government can do to regain public trust, especially now that we're finding out that not only did the government lie to our face on this, but like you said, they went to the social media platforms and did everything that they could to suppress somebody with an opposing belief. I would hope that when people read things like this, that it gives them a moment of pause and they think about the messaging that we get from our government, the messaging that we get from our social media platforms, and maybe just take a few minutes to just wonder, how often do things like this actually happen on topics that don't currently have our attention? Because I think it's fucking terrifying.
Yeah, I think more complicit than the government, because the government is doing what it does and historically has done that. The media, there should be responsibility for, the media exercising its constitutional right and Americans' constitutional right to free speech. The fact that they're suppressing Americans' voices to uplift their own and disseminate false information. Again, if it was a different standard, Americans would be locked up as they were. I mean, there's still people who are literally thrown in jail because they said, I'm not going to shut the doors of my business, which is bananas. I mean, I think one of Trump's picks out of Florida, I won't mention his name, but he was a sheriff who was responsible for arresting a pastor who wanted to keep his church open. So you can go to a public venue or a BLM protest and you are fine.
There was
As
a
long as
stand-up paddleboarder that was arrested, I believe, in Long Beach, California, out by himself. And I think it's been a long time since I've seen this. I'm pretty sure that there was 3 patrol cars on the beach and a boat that was involved in this.
interdicting him.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember seeing that video. And what the most alarming thing about that video is they were interdicting him in the ocean by himself.
Interdicting a paddleboarder, for clarity. This guy was not conducting espionage or paddling a nuclear missile onto the shores of the United States.
Yeah, by himself.
Yeah.
So it's like, if the dude's up there by himself and then you're interdicting him with other people because you think that he's a potential threat to the public, you're actually creating more of a problem because you're now interacting with him and you're close to him. He could have had COVID and been like, I got COVID, I'm going to go out and paddleboard my days away, whatever his mindset was. But the most alarming thing about that was the responses from that video. In fact, if you likely find it archived somewhere and you look at the comments, there are so many comments saying, this guy's irresponsible, good, put him in jail where he belongs. He's risking people's lives. And it's like, oh my gosh. And if you don't remember those times, you need to go back and look at it because we forget really quick because our nation was super divided and this place was crazy based on what the government was disseminating through the media. And shame on the government, but shame on the media because they're the ones who got away with it. I mean, as private institutions who were literally leveraging the government to do what they wanted, and I think it was a mutual benefiting relationship, how there's not any consequences to that is beyond me. How they can get away with that is beyond me.
Good morning, everybody. As you know, Change Agents is an Ironclad original, but what you may not know is that for over a decade, Ironclad has worked with brands and individuals to create world-class films, series, podcasts, and ad campaigns. In fact, I've been working with Ironclad for the past few years. I was introduced to them on a project through the Navy SEAL Foundation. I've worked with them on a variety of projects, even up here in Montana, long before they proposed the idea of Change Agents to me. They're the best in their field. And I say that because there are plenty of people out there looking for the best, looking for the cream of the crop, looking for the top of the triangle. And if you're looking for that, you need to look no further than Ironclad. If you ever need media by way of film, a series, podcasts, or ad campaigns, they have you covered.
I think there are some consequences showing. One of the bullet points we're not going to have time to get to was Comcast announcing that they're spinning off some of their traditional media because traditional media is dying. And I think a lot of people will point towards the 2024 election as like the death throes of traditional media, especially polling and just talking heads and pundits. And specifically inside of that, they'll talk about the presidential debate between Trump and Biden, where even after that, for the first time I've ever heard CNN, a panel of CNN anchors, I would have thought that I was listening to Fox News of how critical they were being. That was a secondary symptom, though. I think that this distrust of corporate media, if you will, actually really started gaining traction during COVID. And a mutual friend of ours, Rogan, is, not that he single-handedly has changed the face of media, but his platform is huge. And, the way that he was attacked by even just platforming people who had a narrative other than the natural origin, the wet market that, like you said, literally happened to be across the street from an institute of novel coronaviruses, but it was what does Jon Stewart say? It was a pangolin or something like that. Somebody ate a pangolin. As it continued growing, the competing products to the commercial traditional media space, which was either YouTube or they started growing. And then you take that momentum into the 2024 election where you're being bombarded with, if you don't agree with us, you're a fascist, you're a racist, you're a misogynist, you're a Nazi. I think that was just the final straw that got put on the proverbial camel's back for traditional media. But I think this is the long-term consequences of how they behave. And I think it began during COVID. So I do think that there's consequences, but I think it's taken about a half a decade for them to arrive.
Yeah. I think that analysis is spot on.
Well, it creates an interesting ecosystem because one thing that I'm cognizant of, now that people are getting their news from other sources, whether it be podcasting or YouTube, it has to be constantly, I want people to constantly be reminded that, those mediums are not necessarily altruistic either. There are people in those mediums that might have their own motives as well. Like, I don't know Alex Jones personally. He seems to be one of the craziest motherfuckers walking. And I'm actually glad that the human species produced somebody like him because he is insane. Has he been proven to be correct on some of the things that he has said? Yes, he's been galactically wrong on others, but he exists in that medium that now people are pointing towards as being the new news. And it's just it reminds me that you have to be cautious. People should be cautious listening to you and I, right? We can express our opinions, but also there could be financial gain for us to be doing this. There could be growth in the companies that we either support or own ourselves, growth in social media. There's always, you know what I mean? There's no ecosystem where there's just a purist out there for no reason other than, enhancing the benefit of society, at least that I have encountered that exists. So regardless of where you consume your information, I guess my warning would be for people, just keep your radar up.
Yeah, I think that's in full transparency. That's good to even talk about like our particular situation. And like, hey, everybody has a potential shift in bias. I think the difference is like in free market capitalism, there's an expectation because we have to earn a living to get paid to do our things, that's acceptable. What's not acceptable is production notes coming from an entity or organization that's programming the talking points that me and you put out every single day. Like for full transparency, me and you go into this completely blind. Ironclad they send us an email that's, hey, here's potential issues. I never look at that email. I mean, no offense to Ironclad. I just don't look at it because I know my goal is to stay up on current events. You've been doing it too. We do it on Twitter. We do it on X. We already know at least something about what we're going to talk about. And when we do talk about it, it's not being derived from a production note, from a narrative that's been shaped by a corporation with talking points. And that just makes us talking heads. It's coming from our experiences. It's coming from our life experiences now all the way back to the origin of our lives, the beginning, right? We're talking the full complexity of our life experience. I think that's the difference, right? I want people to know, hey, we got good company sponsoring us. They're providing us the opportunity to do this, but they don't control nor shift the narrative and how we communicate it. And we will not be swayed that way. I mean, some of the people that I love, like Bongino and the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, all these guys, there's far rights, there's extremes, there's moderates, but I even hear in their talking points some production notes where I'm like, oh, they're talking from the same perspective. Like it sounds like they're getting the same email with the same points. Now, is that bad? As long as it's not shifting their opinion and narrative to jump on a bandwagon when it's appropriate. Like we did an episode on drones, me and you did. And
Sponsored by DJI. No big deal.
Yeah. I heard
it's a joke.
Like, for example,
clarity, that's a joke, everyone.
Somebody's gonna pull that and be like, see, I told you. I heard Bongino talking about it, and Bongino has a completely opposite perspective where he's like, he thinks this is some government program. He thinks it's some kind of like their conspiracy, and it's just a more extreme version of that. I like that you can go to Bongino and get that weighted version, or you can go to us and get a more moderate version, wherever we land on the spectrum. I don't even know where we land, but it's like, but that's the best part of it. It's not talking points derived from a corporation that's spewing a massive narrative because they want to shift the way that, to shift an election, to shift whatever. I think that's why people are tuning in to shows like this.
Yeah, I hope so. And like you said, we get an email and I'm literally reading the email verbatim to you at the opening when we discuss it. There's no talk about this. This is just, and I scroll through and I pick the ones that I want and we skip the ones, or we'll get them the next time when we have more time because you got a heart out here in a minute. But that's all there is. Hey, here's a current topic. What do you guys think? And that's the way that I like it. I have no issue with Bongino. My issue not with him, but when people, what I will say is he's a little bit more, I think, targeting the sensationalized aspect. But if you're starting to hear the same thing, the only time I think it's bad is that when the person producing the content isn't clear or transparent, if there is a talking point that is coming from somewhere else, and you start hearing that, but you're not really sure where it's coming from, that's where I would use the term bad, or and I don't know if that's
Yeah.
necessarily the right term. You have to be transparent. If a brand or an
Yes.
individual is asking you to say something, my personal moral stance on that is you need to let people, you can say it, but let people know where that's coming from.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and my hope in the evolution of this show is, if we do evolve this, it would be like me and you waking up, meeting at the studio, and doing like a daily thing, right?
Yeah, it'd be dope.
And then that's put out every day. The frequency and volume is turned up. Well, would we need help with articulating or shaping the organization of that? For sure. But is anybody in the production team going to tell me what to say via teleprompter? The answer is never.
Yeah.
And so I think the teleprompter is made it convenient for talking heads to speak to narratives. But what you see in the Bonginos of the world and our show and the Shapiros is they're not using that. They have to know the information. They need to know where it comes from. They have to shape an opinion around it. And this talking head thing is not going to work any longer. They're not going to get away with it.